Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Life is Strange Double Exposure. I play on the Xbox Series X. It's also available on the PS5, Nintendo Switch, and PC. So let's get into the story. You once again step into the shoes of Max Caulfield. She's been traveling the country as a photographer. She recently got a sweet gig doing seminars / almost teaching at a prestigious art college. And generally, life is going pretty good for her, until one night one of her friends needs to take a call, walks off, and they suddenly hear a gunshot. Her friend's been murdered, and Max has to find out who did it. Unfortunately, her time rewinding powers have disappeared. But this event has created two separate timelines, and Max can now jump between them, which I thought was a really cool idea, because it still kind of has time power elements to it, and it takes from the comic books where Max discovered the ability to jump between separate timelines. They don't go quite as extreme with it in Double Exposure as they did in the comics, but I thought it was a cool idea. Now, Life is Strange is really always all about the story and what's going on, and there were some great twists and turns in this, as well as some really great characters. I really liked some of the students, and I really enjoyed Max's interaction with them, as well as her interaction with specifically Moses I really liked as a character. And I'm going to say this with some preface, I have really liked what Deck 9 has been doing with the Life is Strange series, as well as just their storytelling in general. I loved True Colors, and I really enjoyed Before the Storm, but they went a direction in this game, which I was really loving up until the direction they went. There was a twist at the very end where I was just like, it definitely made me feel a way, and I felt a way about it since, having completed the game, and overall that way is not positive. And it definitely makes me less enthusiastic about Life is Strange games to come, because it feels like they're setting the series on a course that I just don't know that fits. Which that probably warrants a spoiler talk, which I'll probably do later. And one thing I love that they did with the story was that you can kind of pick which ending you wanted from Life is Strange, the original game, and the game kind of flows with it. So whether you saved Chloe or didn't save Chloe, the game flows with it. Which I always kind of liked because it felt kind of multiverse-ish, which I've always thought of the Life is Strange series as being, since you can make any decision you want and everybody's making their own decisions, so it kind of changes up everything. And it really opens up the idea of like a multiverse. But for now, let's get on to the audio and the voiceover work. Some of the early lines were a little weird. They didn't just feel quite right, but as it went on, they got better. And eventually you forget about some of those early lines and it gets to be really enjoyable. And I think overall, though, the voiceover work is well done. As for the music, I love the music. I think the soundtrack is great. It's definitely a soundtrack that I want to own and just listen to some more, because I, generally speaking, love the music they pick for these games. And then you have the sound effects, which are really good. There were a few places where I noticed some missing sound effects, but I think overall the sound design was really good, down to, this is happening at winter, cracking of ice on the pond next to the quad, or in the quad, I mean. I thought that was cool and well done. But there were some audio issues, like Max's audio sounding perfectly fine, but other characters sounding kind of muffled. Like you could clearly hear them, but it just sounded a little off. And it was multiple conversations where that was the case, and it was just kind of strange and felt bad. Just didn't work. But then there was also this audio popping throughout the game. You would just hear these kind of random pops that were really noticeable because they happened so much. Let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this being a Life is Strange game, it's an interactive narrative. So there's a lot of wandering about, finding things, there are some collectibles, just poking around and kind of discovering more about the world, which is always something I really enjoy in these games. And it's always interesting at the end of each chapter because you'll see things you're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I totally missed it. I'm kind of bummed that I missed it because I want to interact more with this world. But then it's also fun when you found something that like a majority of other people missed or things like that. It's kind of fun at the end of each chapter to see those things. But how does the game work? Well, Max bounces between the two timelines to basically solve puzzles to solve Safi's murder. That is the character who was murdered, if I didn't say that earlier. And Max can actually take items from each timeline and bounce between them and use one here in the dead timeline or the live timeline, whatever she needs to do. And it's actually pretty cool and interesting. I think they did a really good job and made that a fun mechanic. But the mechanics aren't something that are crazy in depth. They work well, and they work for the story and with the powers and all of that. Now, while the timeline jumping may not be a really deep mechanic, the conversations always are and how they'll impact things down the road or almost immediately. That's always a part of these games, and that actually always matters. You get that stupid little thing up in the corner that says this decision will have consequences or something like that, and it's like, ooh. But as per usual, that is kind of the core of it, is leaving the decisions up to you as the player and how they'll play out, although I don't think they had the impact on the ending that I would have liked. Now let's move on to the controls. And the first thing I'm going to say is the camera was sensitive as fuck when I started the game. Like, it's only at 50% on the bar when you open up the menu, but you got to knock that down quite a bit so that you're not just swinging the camera around like wild. It's too much. As for the moving around and responsiveness of the controls, I mean, the moving around works fine enough and the responsiveness is there. Neither of those are like detrimental to gameplay, so... But let's move on to the graphics and visuals, and slowly but surely these games have been moving further and further away from the original, in that the original looked very much like one giant watercolor painting almost. They've been getting a little more realistic, but never hyper realistic. It is still very stylized, and I think it works, and I think that does help age well for the game. Except for Lucas and Moses, they looked like they were ripped straight out of The Sims, or at least every time I saw them, I just felt like they were straight out of The Sims, and maybe that's just me. But I think overall, they actually did a really good job, especially with the faces, which is just kind of key in a game like this. Giving you those facial expressions for each of the characters based on your decision, just based on what's going around, based on any and all conversation. I think it's incredibly important because, well, at the end of the day, it's all about the storytelling and it's all about seeing these characters in that world. That being said, the world itself is like a college campus, and it happens all basically just around that college campus, whether it's in one of the buildings, at the local bar nearby, things like that. But I think they did a good job bringing all of that to life. You have the somewhat overly serious principal, I guess. I don't know what she is. And like her area very much fits that. You've got Max's little like faculty house, which is actually not little and it's super fucking nice. But it definitely has her flavor of like the pictures around. She does her little pictures on the wall with the lights around it. Like you get to feel that this is her place, her space. But then out in the quad, you get to see the students roaming around and how they're interacting. You can even listen in on conversations, which just adds an extra level of depth to the world. But then they do a cool thing with the living world and the dead world. The dead world kind of has this bluish tint to it at all times, where the living world has kind of a yellowish tint to it to make it feel more lively and vibrant. There were admittedly a few visual glitches. There was a pen floating in the air. There was a character speaking to me without their lips moving at all. Slightly disturbing. No, they weren't a ventriloquist. And then you've got your normal stuff of like when a character grabs something or moves and it'll just kind of do a weird twitch, but then it'll go back to normal right away. And obviously those things are noticeable and they're mildly distracting at the time, but you get past them fairly quickly. Okay, so to jump into the wrap up, I was really excited going into this game. I was loving this game literally up until the end, and the ending didn't quite destroy it for me, but like I said, it made me feel a way, and that way is not so positive. And it does. It makes me concerned for the future of this franchise because I feel like they're going in a weird direction that I don't think fits with what they've been doing. So I've got to say, like, if you've really loved Life is Strange, Before the Storm, True Colors, all of those, and the way those stories went and how they were kind of more or less fairly self-contained, I gotta say, you might have a hard time enjoying Life is Strange Double Exposure once you hit that ending. And for me, it really did kind of take away from everything else I had been loving about the game. So it is tough to recommend this game as a Life is Strange fan. We're so many games deep and they're going down a road that I don't know that I support. So it is kind of hard to recommend this. And it may turn out that it's easier to pretend that Life is Strange ended with True Colors. Okay, in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, do you think it looks like Lucas and Moses were ripped out of The Sims? Am I crazy? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.